Yo, what's going on, Dragon Ballers? Welcome back to another video. Today, pretty interesting topic. We're talking about how the game has evolved. We've come a long way since set 1 in the early days of Dragon Ball Super. It's been almost 3 years now, and Unison Cards are going to change the game in a major way. I want to talk about how that's going to happen in today's video. Probably going to notice this a bit more when premiere events and regular play comes back into the scene, but I'm sure you'll notice it a bit in online play as well. Guys, if you're new here, make sure to subscribe. Hit that bell so never miss a video, especially now that we are in quarantine. Lots of downtime to talk about DBS. And guys, if you do want to help in this trying time, there are many free ways to help out. You could watch the video, like the video, maybe watch an ad, maybe share the video. And if you want to buy any cards you see in today's video, you can always use my link in the description below to TCG Player or Bearded Collectibles. All those things really do help out quite a bit. So with that being said, we're going to get right on into this video. So in the early days of Dragon Ball Super, it was a really different game than what you see now. If you guys didn't play in the set 1 or 2 days, one thing you might hear and not know much about were like Soul Striker mirror matches or like blue-green Vegeta, back when Vegeta used to actually have a good meta dominant leader. It was really just all about resource control. It was who had more 5k combos at the end of the game, who had a bigger hand size, who was able to manage the board better. That was really the name of the game. That's one of the reasons why the OG cell chain, which I've talked about many times on this channel, if you guys don't know what that is, it's a 7-drop cell. Basically, it says when you play it, your opponent discards until they have 3 cards left in their hand, and you were able to drop that as early as turn 3. So a little bit of history for those of you guys who weren't playing at that time, but that card, that strategy was so powerful because it was all about resource control. Who had, like I said, who had the bigger hand size, who had the bigger board control. Now that cell chain I just mentioned, you were able to drop it on turn 3 with a 3-drop 15k cell card that would allow you to go up into the 7-drop all in one turn. And by today's standards, even if the 3-drop cell wasn't restricted to 1 copy per deck like it is today, would it be all that good? I mean, we talked about that in a video on the channel over the past few months, and the conclusion was kind of not really, because if you play modern Dragon Ball Super, you know that the game is evolved to a point where counterplay is so strong and so prominent that 3-drop cell would probably never stick to the board against most decks in the current format. But if you look at the card Hidden Awakening Kale on the screen here, critical auto when you play this card, choose one of your battle cards and KO it, so that already sounds like a negative cost. Then choose any number of your opponent's battle cards, of which the total cost adds up to 5 or less, and KO them. This was the best card in the game because it allowed you to snipe multiple 1-drops, or like a 2-drop and a 3-drop, or a 2-drop and 3 1-drops. This allowed you to remove so many of your opponent's 5k combos. This used to be one of the best cards in the game. The added effect on this card attacks you with 5 less cards in your hand, draw 1. So this used to be one of the best cards in the game. And then we evolve as the game goes on to a card like Bardock the Progenitor. So for a long time, again, this is before counterplay, this is before what you might know as modern DBS, Bardock the Progenitor opened and paved the way for what would be known as a very dominant aggro format, Storm. We talked about Storm in a video, I think 2 weeks ago on the channel now, how Storm dominated DBS. I explained that whole deck and how that ended up coming about. But that was another evolution that Dragon Ball Super saw, was Storm coming out, wreaking havoc. Aggro was really all you could really play at that point, until we got Janemba, which was just a super defensive deck. So the game has evolved up until this point, and counterplay was a thing, I guess you could say. The only real counterplay in the game up until this point was Cold Bloodlust, that was locked into Frieza army leaders. So the only really relevant ones that were able to use that were Mecha Frieza. Ginyu was pretty relevant for a while, and then you had your on and off splashes of like set 1 Golden Frieza. So that was really the only strategy you saw playing Cold Bloodlust, some type of yellow Frieza army, and this would negate the effect of the card being played. It wouldn't actually negate the play, wouldn't actually get rid of the card. Then a few sets later, we got Clash of Fates, and we saw Preemptive Strike. This was the first time we saw a counterplay card outside of Cold Bloodlust and Crusher Ball, really, that actually altered the way a card would be played, or in this case would not be played. So Preemptive Strike, 2 green, counterplay. If your lead card is green and the battle card your opponent is playing has an energy cost of 4 or less, it is placed in the owner's drop area instead of being played. Now the problem with this card when it came out, this didn't really jumpstart the entire counterplay format. It kind of just was a card that was really looked over, and there are quite a few reasons for that. One of the main ones was that green leaders were very lackluster. A green leader was really never prominent until much later in the game, and there was a really good green leader that came out in Clash of Fates, the Super Saiyan Goku, the Double Strike Goku, but still Wasn't very good, sat on the back burner for a long time. So with that being known, that in the beginning of the game it was all about resource management, then it became a very aggressive heavy format, and the fact that counterplay wasn't very popular, we come to these cards. So cards like Foreseeing Hit, cards like Chain Attack Trunks, cards like Path to Greatness. These were cards that people used to actually spend energy on, believe it or not. Again, if you play modern DBS, if you didn't play DBS back then, this might be more of a foreign concept to you, because we didn't really have counterplay. So a card like Foreseeing Hit, for example, 4-drop 20k double strike. When you play this card from your hand, your opponent reveals their hand, choose up to 2 battle cards with 35,000 power or less from their hand, send them to the warp. At the end of your opponent's next turn, return all cards sent to the warp with this skill to their hand. This was the best red card. You had to play 4 of this in a red deck once upon a time, and it was so powerful. You got the hand knowledge, you get to rip out super combos, you get to rip out your opponent's next turn play, and you get to put huge pressure on. And people actually casted 4 energy for this card. It was pretty nuts. Chain Attack Trunks paired with Zeno the Plain God, the Chain Attack Zeno combo. Again, a concept you might not be familiar with if you haven't played DBS up until recently. You would drop Chain Attack, sometimes for 4 energy, sometimes for 2 energy if you were evolving it. You would play the Zeno from your hand. You would wipe both players' fields and both players' hands back to the deck. Both players would draw a random 5 cards. This was a very problematic and very powerful strategy back then. And then even a card like Son Goku Path to Greatness. This is a card that allowed you to go into Height of Mastery Son Goku much easier when it came out in the Power Booster. And the Height of Mastery allows you to play it, tap 3 of your opponent's cards. That can be energy, battle cards, then it's a dual attack, triple striker. And these cards were just cards that once they were played, you immediately got paid. There was very little interaction, very little ways to stop these types of things. I even mentioned Cold Bloodlust before, and I mentioned Crusher Ball, and the Height of Mastery Son Goku that Path to Greatness allows you to drop has Deflect, so it wasn't even affected by Cold Bloodlust, wasn't even affected by Crusher Ball. That thing came down, tapped you out, and attacked for 2 huge triple strikes. It was pretty problematic. There were a few formats where it was basically whoever gets to the win condition first kind of just wins the game. And then eventually that would change once we got into set 7. Eventually we saw a card like Denial of Hope, a 2-drop red, negate the play of anything 20 or less, put it in the drop area if your leader's red. We saw the introduction of arrival cards like SSB Gogeta Resonant Explosion in the first expansion that introduced dual colors. This would come into play mid-battle, pop a battle card of 20 or less. So you had battle interruption there that would stop your opponent's strategy midway. Then we had battle card counterplays like Chomp of the Trickster. That was actually one of the first good answers to a card like Height of Mastery Son Goku, one of the first good answers to a card like Gogeta 7 Hero Revived, and Denial of Hope. It actually allowed you to answer all those cards I mentioned on the previous page, the Foreseeing Hit, the Chain Attack Trunks, the Path to Greatness itself. Denial of Hope actually ended up changing the landscape of the game, in my opinion, for the better. I mean, a lot of people nowadays will complain about counterplay format. You can't play a battle card into counterplays, and it is annoying, but I think it's a little bit more annoying to auto-lose to cards like Gogeta 7 and Path to Greatness. But with that being said, we now come to an era of the game where Unison cards are going to be a thing. People basically call them Planeswalkers because that's what they resemble from a game like Magic the Gathering, and they are pretty similar, but they're also pretty different. Now, the thing with these cards is they are not affected by counterplay because they're not battle cards. This is one of the questions I had as we were getting new information about Unison cards. Can you Denial of Hope them? Can you Vegeta the Cruel them, depending on how much energy cost you pay for them? And we do know that if you pay 3 energy for a Unison card, it's considered a 3-drop Unison card. That doesn't change with the markers, just the marker number will change. But the point is here, these cards are unaffected by counterplay. Now, does it become a situation in which you play them and immediately get paid? Well, that depends, and that's what makes it a lot more interesting than how battle cards were back in the day, where you just immediately played Foreseeing Hit, you immediately looked at the hand, and your opponent really just couldn't do anything about it. Vegeta, Unison, and Fury, for example, you can use its passive effect very easily. You're able to pay 2 for this card, you can use the -1, you can prevent your opponent from attacking with battle cards greater than an energy cost, but then it only has 1 marker and it's vulnerable to dying on the next turn. You could then tap it if you wanted to give an additional marker, but then you wouldn't be able to attack with it, so that's a trade-off you have to consider. And then the real powerhouse effect of the card, activate main, shoot up to one of your opponent's energy, switch to rest mode, then this card gains plus 5,000 power, double strike, and dual attack for the turn. That is going to cost you 3 markers. So how do you generate that many markers? Well, you could pay 4 for this card and then use -3, so you are basically playing a 4-drop and then getting paid. You could also pay 3 for this, and then you could use the activate main, tap one of your other battle cards, give an additional marker. But then you didn't play the Vegeta earlier in the game, and you didn't use its activate main to prevent your opponent from attacking with big battle cards. So there's a bit of a trade-off there. There's also a trade-off in the sense that these cards don't have combo power, so they are clunkier in your hand. So basically, it's kind of like the same logic of adding more extra cards or adding more 10k combos to your deck. If your deck isn't really fluid with energy, if your deck doesn't really manipulate energy well, that can definitely pose a problem to you. Let's look at Gotenks Unison of Rage here. So this one actually has a +1 marker, so every turn, once per turn, because it is an implied once per turn, you can self-awaken if you need to. Then you can choose one of your leader cards, and it gets minus 5,000 power for the duration of the turn. So you're able to passively give it markers. Again, if you want to play this on turn 2, you can then give it a +1 marker. So that's basically 3 markers for 2 energy. That's really, really strong. And then self-awaken if you need it. But then the other -2 effect, which is the powerhouse effect, is kind of costly in terms of markers. Choose one of your leader cards, and it gets minus 5,000 power for the turn. Look at your opponent's hand, choose a 1 multicolored battle card or a battle card with 10,000 power or less in it, and place it in the owner's drop area. So this thing has the power to snipe secret rares. A lot of secret rares are multicolor that are really strong. Cell Xeno, Vegito Patora, Red Blue Victory Strike. A lot of these multicolor secret rares are very, very strong. But again, there's the trade-off there. If you want to cast this for 2 energy, you're not really going to be able to reliably use the -2 markers unless you want to kill it right then and there. You could +1 marker for a turn, and then you can maybe generate the markers. But if your opponent attacks it, and then you can't combo to defend it because you're not allowed to as per the game rules, well, that poses a problem in and of itself. It seems like that the Unison cards are going to maintain a power of 15k. I hope that kind of remains to be the case, because then leaders can't really threaten them, and that could be problematic. So that could maybe be a situation where you pay them and get played, but this is really going to change the landscape of the game again, because these are cards that are immune to counterplay. But that doesn't mean necessarily that they don't have ways they can be countered, but you can play them safely, not worry about Denial of Hope, not worry about Frost Poison, not worry about Crusher Ball. You can play these cards, not worry about those cards. You can go for a win condition. So it's really, really interesting. There is counterplay to these cards, but not in the literal sense. So that's kind of what I wanted to talk about in today's video. How powerful Unison cards are going to be, how they are going to change the landscape of the game. Counterplay is not going to be quite as effective, but there are strategies that are able to beat them. So I want to know in the comments below what you guys think about Unison cards. How are they going to change the game for you? What do you guys think? Let me know in the comments. Thank you guys for watching. I will see you all next time.